The front door opened at 9:47 inches the evening on Thanksgiving. Not because anyone was arriving. Because a man named Richard Calloway held it open with one hand, looked at his 7 months pregnant wife standing in their living room, and said 4 words with the calm of someone announcing a weather forecast. "You need to go now." Elena Calloway was 34 years old. She was wearing the same blue dress she had worn to her baby shower 6 weeks earlier, the one with the small embroidered flowers at the collar that her mother had called sweet. Her coat was on the hook by the door. Her keys were in the bowl on the counter. Her hospital bag, already packed and sitting in the corner of the nursery, was 14 steps away down the hallway. She had nowhere to go. And the man holding the door was not a stranger. He was her husband of 5 years. He was the father of the child pressing his heel against the inside of her ribcage at that exact moment. He was the man who had held her hand at every single prenatal appointment, who had installed the car seat himself on a Tuesday afternoon in September, who had painted the nursery twice, because the first shade of yellow was not quite right. He was also the man who, by the time Elena walked out that door and into the November cold, had already spoken to a lawyer, quietly emptied a savings account she did not know existed, and made a phone call to another woman that would later become Exhibit C in a criminal proceeding. What Richard Calloway did not know, what he could not have accounted for, was that his wife was a forensic accountant. That she had spent 11 years reading the financial records of people who believed they had hidden everything perfectly. That she had learned professionally how to follow money through walls. He kicked out the wrong woman on the wrong night. And by the time the sun came up over their neighborhood the next morning, everything he thought he owned was already starting to disappear. This is Elena's story. People who knew Elena Calloway at work described her the same way, almost without variation. Precise, unflappable, the kind of person you want on your side and never want across a table from you. She was a senior forensic accountant at a mid-size firm in Columbus, Ohio. She specialized in fraud examination, the kind of work that required her to read numbers the way a surgeon reads tissue, looking not just at what was there, but at the shape of what was missing. She had testified in 11 federal cases. She had found irregularities that 2 prior auditors had missed. She was quietly, methodically excellent at her job. At home, she was something different. Not less, just softer in the edges. The kind of woman who kept fresh herbs on the kitchen windowsill and remembered everyone's coffee order and texted first when she hadn't heard from a friend in a while. She had met Richard at a charity auction 6 years earlier. He was tall, unhurried, the kind of man who seemed at ease in rooms where other men were performing ease. He worked in commercial real estate, managing a portfolio of properties across the Midwest. He was charming in the specific way that experienced liars are charming, with warmth that felt personal even when it was practiced. Elena had fallen for him the way careful people fall for things they've convinced themselves to stop being careful about. She was 31, newly promoted, and had spent the previous 3 years pouring everything into work. Richard felt like a counterbalance. He was warm where she was precise, social where she tended toward quiet. She told her best friend Camille, "He makes the world feel less like a spreadsheet." They were married 18 months after they met. A small ceremony, a long honeymoon in Portugal, a house in a suburb with good schools that Richard had found and insisted upon. Elena had noticed, dimly, that most of their major decisions followed that pattern. Richard found something. Richard was certain. Elena adjusted. But certainty in a partner had felt like a gift to a woman whose profession required her to question everything. The red flags had been there. She had explained them away in the vocabulary of a woman who loved someone and didn't want to be proven right. The first one was money, specifically the way Richard handled it. He had suggested, early in their marriage, that they maintain separate accounts with a shared household account they each contributed to monthly. It keeps things simpler, he had said. No arguments over personal spending. Eleanor, who had grown up watching her parents fight about credit card bills, had agreed. What she had not yet understood was that the arrangement also meant she could not easily see what he was doing with the money that never entered the shared account. The second red flag was a name. A woman named Sasha who appeared in his phone as a work contact and who texted at hours that work contacts rarely did. Elena had asked about it once, carefully, in the measured tone she used when she needed information without signaling alarm. Richard had been dismissive but not defensive, a distinction she noted because defensiveness would have told her something was wrong. Dismissiveness, she had decided, just meant he found the question unworthy of serious engagement. She had filed it and moved on. The third was smaller and harder to name. It was the way he looked at her stomach in the 7th month of her pregnancy. Not with the softness she would have expected. With something that functioned like patience but felt, at a frequency she could not quite identify, like calculation. She had not been able to name it at the time. She would name it later, sitting across from a detective in a room with fluorescent lighting and a cup of coffee going cold on the table beside her. That look was a man waiting for a plan to be ready. The holiday had started like all of them did in the Calloway house, with performance. Richard's mother Diane arrived at noon with a casserole and a running commentary on everything Elena had chosen to do differently from the way Diane would have done it. The turkey was too big. The centerpiece was too fussy. The house was too warm. Elena moved through the kitchen with the focused efficiency of a woman who had decided that surviving the day was its own form of success. 14 people for dinner. Richard's family primarily 2 brothers, their wives, an assortment of cousins and their children. Elena's contribution to the guest list was Camille, her best friend, who had driven 3 hours from Cincinnati and who had, at various points during the meal, gripped Elena's arm under the table like a life raft. The day unraveled in the way that days do when the unraveling has been a long time coming. Not in one dramatic moment, but in a series of small things that, laid end to end, formed a shape Elena could recognize. Richard barely spoke to her at dinner. Not in the way of a busy host managing a crowded table, in the way of a man who had already placed distance between himself and a decision he had made. After dinner, while Diane held court in the living room over coffee and pie, Elena went to the kitchen to start the washing up. She was at the sink, water running, when her phone buzzed on the counter. A notification from their shared banking app, not the household account, but a secondary account Richard had set up years ago for what he described as investment liquidity. An account Elena had access to only because her name was technically on the paperwork, though she had never used it. A transfer notification, $47,000. Moved out of the account at 7:14 that evening. She turned the water off. She stood very still, the way she stood when she found something in a set of financial records that required her complete attention. Her mind, trained over 11 years to recognize the architecture of deception, assembled the pieces quickly. She dried her hands on the dish towel. She walked down the hall to Richard's study. The door was not fully latched. She pushed it open. He was on the phone. His back was to the door. His voice was low, but not low enough. "It's done. I moved it tonight." "No, she doesn't know. She won't." A pause. After Christmas, I need a clean timeline. The property transfer goes through on the 15th. Then we wait. Another pause. I know what I'm doing, Sasha. I've been planning this for 8 months. Elena closed the door without a sound. She walked back to the kitchen. She washed 3 more plates. She thought about the 11 federal cases she had worked. She thought about the pattern of a man who moves money on a holiday, when banks are closed and lawyers are at dinner tables of their own. She thought about the word times, timeline. She thought about the word times, property. She thought about the baby and his heel pressing into her ribs, and the nursery 14 steps down the hall. When Richard came out of his study 20 minutes later, Elena was at the kitchen table with a piece of pie she wasn't eating. His face when he saw her was arranged into something approximating normalcy, and she recognized the effort of that arrangement because she had looked at arranged faces in deposition rooms for 11 years. "You look tired," he said. "I'm fine," she said. She was not fine. She was already thinking. The guests left by 9. Diane lingered until 9:30, making comments about the leftover storage and the correct way to wrap turkey. When the last car pulled out of the driveway, Richard closed the front door and turned to Elena, and his expression dropped the way a man's face drops when he no longer needs it to perform. "We need to talk," he said. She had known this was coming. She had spent the previous 90 minutes deciding how to respond when it did. "Okay," she said. "I think we both know this isn't working." She looked at him. "What isn't?" "This. Us." "Elena, I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I think—" "I heard your phone call, Richard." The room changed. The air in it changed. He went very still in the way that people go still when they are calculating rather than feeling. What phone call? It was not a question. It was a test of how much she knew. The one at 7:14. While I was doing the dishes. The one about the property transfer on the 15th and the 8 months of planning. He looked at her for a long time. And then, slowly, something in his face rearranged itself into something she had never seen on him before. Not anger, not guilt, something colder than either. "You need to go," he said. "Tonight. I'll have someone collect your things next week. I'm 7 months pregnant. I know. It's Thanksgiving, Eleanor." He walked to the front door. He opened it. The November air came in cold and immediate. "We're done. I need you out of this house." She looked at the open door. She looked at her husband. She thought about the nursery down the hall. She thought about Camille, 3 hours away, who would pick up on the first ring. She got her coat. She got her keys. She left the hospital bag where it was. She walked through the door he was holding open, and she did not look at his face as she passed him, because she did not want him to see that she was already planning. The door closed behind her. She heard the lock turn. She sat in the car in the driveway for 45 seconds. She did not cry. She called Camille. "I need you to stay on the phone with me," she said. "And I need you to find me a lawyer who works holidays." Camille met her at a hotel 40 minutes from the house. It was a place with a breakfast included in the rate and a lobby that smelled like synthetic vanilla and carpet cleaner, the kind of place where nothing important was supposed to happen. That night, several important things happened there. Elena sat on the edge of the hotel bed in her coat and her blue dress and told Camille everything in the order it had occurred. Camille, who had known Elena since college, and who had never once seen her cry in any situation involving a man, watched her best friend's face remain level and measured throughout, and found this more frightening than tears would have been. He planned it. Eleanor said. 8 months. That's what he said. 8 months. What does that mean? Planned what exactly? That's what I need to find out. She opened her laptop. Camille ordered room service neither of them would eat. Eleanor spent the next 4 hours doing what she did professionally, following money through walls. She had access to enough. The shared household account showed patterns she had not looked at carefully enough before, or had looked at and decided to trust because trust had felt like the appropriate default. Now she looked without trust. She looked the way she looked at records belonging to strangers. The picture that assembled itself was not a spontaneous decision. It was architecture. Richard had been quietly shifting assets for the better part of a year. Small transfers first, then larger ones as the structure solidified. He had taken out a life insurance policy on Elena 14 months ago, a detail she had vaguely known about because he had mentioned it as routine financial planning during her first trimester. She had signed the form without reading it carefully because she had trusted him, and because she had been tired, and because she had not yet understood what kind of man she was married to. The policy was for $2.3 million. The beneficiary was Richard Calloway. She read that number 3 times. Then she read the clause about the payout conditions. Then she closed the laptop and sat very still for a long moment. "Camille," she said. "Yeah." "He wasn't leaving me." Camille looked at her. 2.3 million, Cam. 14 months old. He moved 47,000 out of a secondary account tonight. The kind of move you make when you're cleaning up before something changes. He mentioned a property transfer on the 15th. He's been planning for 8 months, which is roughly how long I've been visibly pregnant. Elena, he was waiting for a clear financial exit. The baby was the timeline. Camille was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you saying he was going to—" "I'm saying I need a lawyer tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight." The lawyer was a woman named Patricia Huang, who was reached at 11:40 p.m. on Thanksgiving through an emergency family law line, and who arrived at the hotel at midnight in a parka over what appeared to be pajamas, carrying a legal pad and an expression of professional calm. Elena liked her immediately. Elena laid out the financial pattern. Patricia wrote everything down without interrupting. When Elena finished, Patricia set her pen down. "You're a forensic accountant." "Yes." "Yes. Have you documented everything you've shown me? Screenshots, transaction records, the policy document, and a voice memo I recorded in the kitchen starting at approximately 8:55 p.m. The audio quality is clear enough." He was thorough about the timeline. Patricia looked at her. "You recorded the conversation." I turned the memo app on when I realized I needed evidence rather than clarity. Patricia allowed herself a small expression that was not quite a smile. "First thing in the morning, we go to the DA's office. The insurance policy combined with the asset transfers and the premeditation evidence crosses into criminal territory. This isn't just a divorce, Elena. This is fraud at minimum. If the DA reads the insurance clause the way I'm reading it, it may be considerably more than fraud." Elena nodded. "You need to be somewhere safe tonight, not the hotel somewhere without a trail he can follow." "I'll go to Camille's." "I'll go to Camille's." "Camille goes with you?" "She drove 3 hours to be here. She's not leaving." The morning after Thanksgiving, while Richard Calloway woke up in the house he believed was now entirely his, 3 things happened simultaneously. Patricia Huang filed an emergency motion with the family court, citing financial dissipation of marital assets and potential fraud. The motion froze Richard's access to the secondary account and triggered an automatic review of any additional asset transfers made in the preceding 12 months. Eleanor filed a formal criminal complaint with the Columbus DA's office. A detective named Warren was assigned within 4 hours. When he listened to the voice recording, he listened to it twice without speaking. And a woman named Jade Morrison, who had dated Richard Calloway 4 years before he met Elena, saw a post Camille had made on social media asking if anyone knew Richard Calloway of Columbus. Jade Morrison was a paralegal. She had documentation. She reached out to Patricia Huang before noon. What Jade provided changed the shape of everything. She had been Richard's girlfriend for 2 years. She had, in that relationship, discovered that he had been quietly transferring money out of a joint account they shared, not enormous sums, but a consistent pattern that she had only identified after the relationship ended, and she'd had time to examine her own financial records clearly. She had not reported it at the time because she had not been sure enough, and because she had been humiliated, and because she had believed she might be wrong. She was not wrong. She also provided something else, a text message exchange from 3 years ago, 3 months before he met Elena, in which Richard had made a comment about his long-term financial plans that, read in context, now sounded like the foundational logic of everything Elena had uncovered. Marry money, or marry someone who'll sign what you need them to sign, he had written. The second is easier. That message became Exhibit B. Detective Warren sat across from Elena on the Saturday after Thanksgiving in a room with fluorescent lighting. She had a cup of coffee going cold beside her. She had slept 4 hours, eaten a gas station sandwich, and taken a prenatal vitamin. She was, by her own assessment, functioning adequately. Warren was a compact, unhurried man who appeared to have the professional habit of believing women who came to him with documented evidence rather than requiring them to first overcome his skepticism. Elena appreciated this. She had sat across from enough people in professional settings to understand how rare it was. "Walk me through the insurance policy timeline," he said. She walked him through it. 2 days later, the forensic trace found the $47,000 in a personal account belonging to Richard transferred that same night to a secondary account held jointly with Sasha Reeve. The Reynoldsburg property, valued at approximately $400,000, had been quietly placed in the process of being transferred to an LLC that Richard had established 3 months earlier, with Sasha Reeve as co-owner. The timeline of premeditation, assembled across 2 weeks of financial forensics, stretched back 11 months. The DA's office elevated the charges. Meanwhile, Richard discovered that the accounts were frozen on the Monday after Thanksgiving. He called Elena 3 times. She did not answer. He called Patricia Huang's office, where he was informed that all communication should go through her. He called his own lawyer, a man named Gerald Fitch, who was now trying to understand why he was being asked to manage a criminal defense. Richard's mother called Elena on Tuesday. Diane Calloway had a voice like a woman who had been told she was reasonable her entire life and had never found reason to question it. "Elena, I don't know what you think you're doing, but Richard is a good man, and you are about to destroy your family over a misunderstanding." Elena was sitting in Camille's living room in Cincinnati, her feet elevated, a cup of herbal tea in her hand. The baby had been active all morning, rolling and pressing in that firm, persistent way that Elena had come to think of as the most reliable constant in her current life. "Diane, I'm going to stop you there. Anything you want to say to me, you can say to my attorney. Her number is on the court documents." "You're being hysterical. You're pregnant and emotional and..." "Diane, I'm a forensic accountant. Your son moved $47,000 out of a marital account on Thanksgiving night. He has a $2.3 million life insurance policy on me that he took out 14 months ago. He was planning to transfer a commercial property to an LLC he shares with another woman. I found all of this in 4 hours on a laptop in a hotel room. Hysterical is not the word I would use. Silence, call the attorney, Elena said, and she ended the call. She finished her tea. The baby moved. She put one hand on her stomach and sat quietly in the November light coming through Camille's window. "You okay?" Camille called from the kitchen. "Yes," Elena said, and she meant it, in the particular way of a woman who has passed through the worst of the shock and arrived at something that felt, cautiously, like solid ground. The weeks between Thanksgiving and Christmas were a renovation that nobody chose. Elena moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the 1st of December, 3 weeks before her due date. It was on the 3rd floor of a building in a part of Columbus she had never lived in before. Not fancy, not rough, just ordinary, in the way of a place that had nothing to prove. The bedroom had a window that faced east, which meant she woke up to light every morning. She had not anticipated how much this would matter. She had taken almost nothing from the house. What she had needed most was already packed in the hospital bag, still sitting in the nursery. Patricia had arranged for her to retrieve personal items while Richard was required to be elsewhere under the terms of the emergency court order. Elena had gone on a Tuesday afternoon with Camille and her friend's brother, who drove a truck. She had taken her clothes, her professional documents, her grandmother's rocking chair, the hospital bag, and the small stuffed bear she had bought the week after the first positive pregnancy test. She had left the furniture, the dishes, the decorative objects accumulated over 5 years of a marriage she was now able to see clearly. She did not take the engagement ring. She left it on the kitchen counter where he would find it immediately. She wanted the clarity of that image for him, the ring on the counter, her things gone, the decision visible and permanent. She had one bad night in that first week. Not because of Richard, she had processed her feelings about Richard in the hotel room on Thanksgiving night with the efficiency of a woman who had learned, professionally, that grief for a fraud is brief, because the thing you're grieving for never actually existed. The bad night was about something smaller and more specific. She had been putting together the portable crib in the new bedroom, and she had sat down on the floor, in the middle of it, because she needed to rest, and because the apartment was very quiet, and because she was 7 months pregnant and alone, and the next 3 years of her life were going to require a kind of endurance she had not yet tested. She sat on the floor for a while. She put both hands on her stomach. The baby pressed back. "I know," she said out loud, to no one visible. "We're going to be fine." She did not fully believe it yet. She believed it enough to keep going, which was a sufficient amount for a Tuesday night in early December. She called her mother in Dayton that night. Her parents were the kind of solid, uncomplicated people who communicated love through action rather than expression. Her father had driven to Columbus the next day with a toolbox and spent 4 hours fixing things in the apartment that did not yet need fixing but would eventually, and her mother had filled the freezer with food that Elena could eat for the next 6 weeks without having to think about cooking. Neither of them said much about Richard. What they said instead was, "We're here. What do you need?" Elena had needed exactly that. Her doctor monitored the pregnancy through this period with the particular attentiveness of a physician who understands that stress has physical addresses in the body. Elena came in weekly. The baby remained healthy, active, positioned well. "He's doing his job," the doctor said at 32 weeks. Now make sure you're doing yours. Elena's job in those weeks was twofold. She went to work, because work was the place where she was precisely and unambiguously herself, and returning to it after the holiday had felt like putting on clothing that fit. She also worked with Patricia and Detective Warren, providing financial analysis that the DA's office would incorporate into the criminal case. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror of the new apartment every morning. It had become a small, private ritual she had not intended, but could not stop. Some mornings she looked at herself and felt the vertiginous quality of a life that had been completely rearranged in 3 weeks. Some mornings she looked at herself and felt something quieter, something that had the shape of recognition. Still here, she thought, on more than one of those mornings. Still thinking, still standing. She would do. The baby arrived on December 22nd, 9 days before his due date. His name was Theodore James, and from the first moment, Elena held him 6 pounds, 11 ounces, dark hair, a furrow between his brows that made him look like a small man with strong opinions about something she understood in a way that moved below language that the previous month had been completely worth surviving. Camille was in the room. Her mother was in the waiting area. Her father had driven through a December ice storm to be there. Theodore looked at the world with the alert, assessing expression of someone who understood he had arrived somewhere and was forming his first opinions. "He looks like you," Camille said. "Good," Eleanor said. "That's how I wanted it." She held him and thought about none of the legal proceedings, none of the financial records, none of the case numbers and court dates that would occupy the next several months of her life. She held him and thought about the east-facing window in the new apartment and the rocking chair she had retrieved and the stuffed bear in the portable crib. She thought about all the ordinary, sufficient, real things waiting for them. The criminal case against Richard Calloway moved through the first quarter of the new year with a steadiness that Patricia described as unusually clean. What made it clean was evidence, not the kind that required interpretation or inference, but the kind that documented a plan in the plan's own words. The voice recording was the foundation. Elena had captured 4 minutes and 17 seconds of Richard's phone call, his own voice, describing his own timeline, using his own words. That recording was not the only piece of evidence, but it was the piece that made every other piece readable. It provided the framework into which the financial trail, the insurance policy, the LLC documents, and Jade Morrison's testimony all fit with the clarity of a picture completing itself. Richard's defense had one available strategy: attack Elena's reliability as a witness. They questioned her mental state during late pregnancy. They questioned her interpretation of the financial records. They submitted a statement from Diane Calloway attesting to Richard's character. They suggested that the voice recording had been taken out of context. The jury was not moved. Jade Morrison testified for 41 minutes. She was composed and specific, the kind of witness who had prepared carefully because she understood that this was the moment she had not been ready for 4 years earlier and intended to be ready for now. She described the financial pattern she had identified in her own records. She read the text message exchange into the record in a clear, even voice. Marry money, or marry someone who'll sign what you need them to sign. The second is easier. The courtroom was very quiet when she finished. Eleanor testified for 2 hours. She was, as she had been described throughout her professional career, precise and unflappable. The defense attorney's cross-examination accomplished nothing. Elena answered every question with the careful specificity of someone who had spent 11 years ensuring that her professional assessments could withstand challenge. She did not become emotional. She did not become cold. She was simply, consistently, accurate. When she left the stand, Detective Warren gave her one small, deliberate nod. Richard sat at the defense table with an expression of composed attention that had clearly been coached. On the last day, when the verdict was being read, something in that composed attention cracked. Not dramatically. Just a fracture in the surface of a face that had spent years presenting itself as something it was not. The jury foreman read each charge in order. Financial fraud. Guilty. Dissipation of marital assets with intent to defraud. Guilty. Insurance fraud, specifically the misrepresentation of intent in the procurement of a life insurance policy. Guilty. Conspiracy. Guilty. The sentencing, 8 weeks later, was 12 to 15 years. Theodore was 4 months old the morning Elena walked back into her office. She had used her leave with the focused intentionality she brought to everything resting when the baby slept, going for walks in the February cold with the stroller Camille had given her, cooking dinner at the table she had bought herself, calling her parents every few days, letting herself exist in the quiet, ordinary rhythms of a life that was small and new and entirely hers. The morning she returned to work, she put Theodore in daycare for the first time. He assessed the situation with the equanimity of a person who had already adapted to a number of significant changes in his brief life, and accepted a green stuffed elephant from the daycare worker with the gravity of a small diplomat receiving a gift. Elena kissed the top of his head. She walked to her car, she sat in it for 30 seconds, then she drove to work and put in a full day. Her caseload in the months that followed was substantial. A new fraud examination involving a construction company in Cincinnati. A consulting request from a DA's office in Indiana regarding an insurance scheme with certain structural similarities to a case she had recently been involved with. She took the Indiana case. She had thought, when she returned to work, that she might want to do something different with the expertise she had developed over the past year. Not just financial forensics in the abstract, but specifically the kind of case she had lived through. She had been right. There turned out to be a specific demand for a forensic accountant who understood the financial architecture of domestic fraud from the inside, who could look at a set of records and see not just irregularities, but the emotional logic of the person who had hidden them. She became that person professionally. She had already become that person experientially. Camille came to Columbus on Theodore's first Thanksgiving, a small, deliberately unhurried meal at Elena's apartment. The two of them and the baby, her parents driving up from Dayton. Elena made the turkey herself. Camille brought a gas station bottle of wine and was not apologetic about it. Theodore sat in a high chair and regarded the proceedings with his characteristic gravity, interspersed with episodes of enthusiastic engagement with a wooden spoon he had adopted as his primary object of interest. After dinner, while her mother and Camille washed dishes and her father dozed in the chair by the east window, Elena sat at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and looked around the apartment. It was not the house in the suburb with the good schools. It was not large. The oven had a temperature inconsistency she had compensated for until she understood it well enough to work with it rather than against it. The upstairs neighbor played guitar on Tuesday evenings, a habit Elena had initially found intrusive and had, over time, come to find companionable without ever having met the person responsible. It was the most genuinely hers that any space she had inhabited had ever been. She looked at her hands around the wine glass. Her grandmother's sapphire ring, retrieved from a box in the house, and kept because it was hers and always had been caught the light from the kitchen. Deep blue, warm. She had worn it every day since she moved out. "You doing okay?" Camille called from the kitchen. "Yes," Eleanor said, the same answer she had given on the Thanksgiving night, 12 months earlier, from the driver's seat of her own car in her own driveway, holding the phone to her ear while the cold came through the door she had just walked through. This time, she did not qualify it, even privately. She was. A year after the Thanksgiving that changed everything, Eleanor sat across from a woman in a coffee shop near her office. The woman's name was Christine. She was 30 years old. She had found Elena through a mutual contact, not through her firm's directory, but through the quieter network of people who had passed through difficult situations and knew someone who had also passed through one and emerged. Christine had a folder in her bag. She had the look of a woman who had spent several weeks deciding whether to open it in front of someone. Elena recognized the look. She had, in a hotel bathroom on Thanksgiving night just over a year ago, worn a version of it herself. "Take your time," Elena said. "Tell me what you found," Christine told her. Elena listened without rushing her toward conclusions. She let her move at the pace of a woman who was in the process of understanding something she had been trying not to understand for a long time. When Christine finished, Eleanor asked 5 questions. Christine answered them. Elena looked at the documents in the folder. "Okay," she said. "Here's what I'd look for first," she told her. Christine wrote it down. Outside the coffee shop window, Columbus went on in the particular way of a December afternoon grey sky. People moving between places, ordinary lives in various states of assembly and reassembly. Richard Calloway was in a correctional facility 2 hours away. Elena had not thought about him in several days, which was progress from the several weeks when she had thought about him rarely, which was progress from the months when she had not thought about him at all because she had been too busy building something to allocate attention to something she had already concluded. He had underestimated her. He had done so with confidence and planning and, she now understood, genuine conviction. The conviction of a man who had never been required to actually look at the people around him, because he had always been able to treat them as instruments. He had looked at a forensic accountant and seen a pregnant woman he could outmaneuver. He had been wrong about almost everything that mattered. "Is this fixable?" Christine asked. Elena looked at her. "The situation, yes. It takes time and documentation, and probably an attorney who knows this territory. But yes. And the feeling that you should have seen it earlier. Does that, it passes," Eleanor said. "You were not stupid. You were trusting someone you had decided to trust. There is a difference. The people who make these decisions about others are counting on that trust. It's the mechanism they depend on. You seeing it when you did is the thing that matters, not the years before." Christine looked at the folder, then back at Elena. "How long did it take before you felt ordinary?" "Some days I was ordinary at 3 months. Some days took longer. It's not linear, but it gets ordinary." She paused. "And then it gets better than ordinary. That part surprised me. I wasn't expecting better." Christine nodded slowly. She sat up slightly straighter. Elena recognized the posture, the moment when a person stops reviewing the damage and starts planning. "Let's start at the beginning," Elena said. "Tell me the first thing you found, and we'll work forward from there. If you've stayed with Elena's story all the way to this point, then you already know what she would want said here. She would not want to be called a survivor, particularly the word implies that surviving was the achievement, and she would correct you. The achievement was what came after. The surviving was just what got her there. She would want you to know that the most important thing she did on Thanksgiving night was not make a phone call, or open a laptop, or press record on a voice memo app. The most important thing she did was decide, in the 45 seconds she sat in that car, in that driveway, in the cold, that she was going to think rather than react. That she was going to treat her own situation with the same clear-eyed methodology she brought to everything else. That she was going to be the most useful version of herself in the worst night of her life. Not everyone has the professional tools Elena had. But the decision to think rather than react, to document rather than dissolve, to believe your own assessment of what you have seen and heard and found that is available to everyone. If something in this story felt familiar to you, please send it to someone who needs to hear it. Not because it will solve the problem, but because sometimes the most important thing is knowing that the problem has a shape, and the shape can be named, and named things can be addressed. Drop a comment below. Tell us, would you have known what to do in that driveway? Tell us your version of the 45 seconds in the car. We read every one. Subscribe, because every week there is another story of someone who got through something they were not sure they could get through. And every one of those stories is the same story at its core, a person who decided that the life waiting on the other side of the hard thing was worth the hard thing. Elena is at her kitchen table right now, probably in an apartment with an east-facing window and a 1-year-old with strong opinions about wooden spoons. The ring is on her right hand. The lawyer's number is in her phone. She is exactly where she is supposed to be, and she got there herself.